A group of hikers stumbled into the depths of the Canadian backcountry near Pemberton, British Columbia, on a chilly November morning in 2019. The untouched wilderness stretched endlessly, the tall pines swaying gently against the crisp air. It was supposed to be a routine trip, a break from the noise of city life, but as they rounded a secluded bend in the forest, something caught their attention. It was a burned-out truck, its blackened metal frame sitting incongruously amidst the vibrant greens and browns of nature. Around it, scattered like grim breadcrumbs, were personal items, charred remnants of clothing, a notebook singed at the edges, and an old pair of hiking boots whose laces had melted into tangled coils. One of the hikers, Sarah, froze mid-step. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling as her companions gathered around her. "It looks like someone left it here." Mark, the leader of their group, ventured hesitantly. His hand hovered near the truck's door but stopped short. "I think we should call the authorities." The group agreed, their earlier enthusiasm drained by the eerie scene. None of them wanted to admit it aloud, but the air around the vehicle felt heavier, suffused with an invisible weight of sorrow. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the local RCMP. By the time the officers arrived, dusk had begun to creep over the forest. The lead officer, Constable Avery, approached the site cautiously, her gloved hand covering her nose from the lingering scent of burned rubber and gasoline. Her flashlight beam cut through the shadows as she inspected the area. "This doesn't look like an accident," she murmured to her partner, Constable Green. "Someone left this here." As the investigation began, it became clear that the vehicle belonged to Marshall Iwasa, a 26-year-old from Lethbridge, Alberta, who had been reported missing a week earlier. The revelation sent shivers through everyone present. Inside the truck's remnants, they found several peculiar items: a pile of partially burned photographs, some with faces scratched out, a map with cryptic red markings, and most unsettling, a half-melted phone, its screen cracked beyond recognition, but still faintly displaying a timestamp from the night before Marshall had been reported missing. Back in town, the news of the discovery spread quickly. Marshall's family, who had been tirelessly searching for him since his disappearance, were contacted immediately. His sister, Christina, arrived at the station within hours, her face pale but resolute. Marshall wouldn't just disappear, she told Constable Avery, clutching a photo of her brother taken months earlier. He wasn't the kind of person to leave without a word. Avery tried to keep her tone neutral. "We're treating this as a missing persons case, but I'll be honest, the condition of the truck, it raises a lot of questions. Questions that led nowhere." The initial sweep of the area revealed no tracks, no blood, and no evidence to suggest foul play. The wilderness seemed to conspire against them, swallowing their search efforts in silence. 2 weeks passed, and the forest grew colder under an encroaching winter. The case, already haunting in its ambiguity, took a darker turn when another name entered the investigation: Daniel Riauch. The connection was tenuous at first, an old receipt from a store hundreds of miles away, found among the scattered items near Marshall's truck. But it bore Daniel's name, dated just a day before his own disappearance 2 years earlier. "How does this make sense?" Green asked, poring over the case files late into the night. "Two missing men, years apart, but linked by this one piece of evidence?" Avery's eyes narrowed as she considered the implications. We're either dealing with a coincidence, or someone is tying these disappearances together. For the first time, the investigation felt like it was moving forward. But as the officers delved deeper into the overlapping timelines, what they uncovered wasn't answers, it was more questions. Who had left the truck there? What did the burned items signify? And why did every lead seem to dissolve into the shadows of the Canadian wilderness? The hikers who had stumbled upon the site had long since returned to their lives, but for Sarah, the memory lingered like a bad dream. She often found herself awake at night, thinking about the expression on Marshall's sister's face when she had arrived at the scene. A mix of desperation and fear, as if she already knew the truth but couldn't bring herself to say it. And deep in the woods, the site remained undisturbed. Marshall's burned-out truck, sitting like a gravestone for a mystery no one could yet solve. Marshall Iwasa had been missing for nearly a month by the time his burned-out truck was towed from the forest clearing. Investigators scoured the vehicle and the surrounding area for clues. Yet, for all their efforts, they found little to work with. The items recovered: a melted phone, a partially burned journal, and several singed photographs, only deepened the mystery. The journal contained fragments of handwritten notes, some barely legible beneath char marks. A few pages hinted at recent troubles, mentions of financial stress and cryptic phrases like, "I feel like I'm being followed," and "can't trust them anymore." The notes stopped abruptly 2 days before Marshall vanished. Marshall's sister, Christina, refused to let the case go cold. She spent hours combing through his belongings and retracing his steps. One evening, while sorting through a box of papers from his apartment, she found a folded piece of paper tucked inside an old textbook. It was a receipt from a hardware store dated the day before he disappeared. The items purchased were ordinary: duct tape, rope, and a gas canister. The implication sent a chill through Christina. Was he planning something? Or was someone else? She whispered to herself, clutching the receipt tightly. Her thoughts spiraled further when the police informed her about the connection to Daniel Rioch, a name she didn't recognize. She turned to social media, scouring posts and comments, desperate for any thread that could tie the two men together. 2 years earlier, Daniel Rioch had vanished from Vancouver under equally mysterious circumstances. His disappearance had attracted little media attention, written off as another case of a transient adult opting for a fresh start. But the receipt found at Marshall's site suggested otherwise. Constable Avery and her team tracked down Daniel's sister, Erica, who still lived in Vancouver. Erica was initially reluctant to speak, but the mention of Marshall's case seemed to stir something in her. "You said his truck was burned?" Erica asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Avery confirmed. "And we found a receipt with Daniel's name on it among the items scattered near the scene." Erica's eyes widened. The same thing happened when Daniel disappeared. His car was found abandoned, stripped clean with no sign of him. The police said it wasn't suspicious, but it never felt right. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Back at the station, Avery laid out the evidence. 2 men, missing years apart, with eerily similar circumstances. Both cases involved vehicles abandoned in remote areas and strange, burned items left behind. "Do we have anything linking their personal lives?" Green asked, poring over the files. "Not yet," Avery replied, frustration creeping into her voice. "No mutual friends, no shared workplaces. They didn't even live in the same city. But one detail stood out. Both Marshall and Daniel had spent time in the backcountry near Pemberton before their disappearances." "We're missing something," Avery said, pacing the room. "This isn't random. Someone or something is orchestrating this." Christina's search led her to the last place anyone had seen Marshall: a gas station just outside Pemberton. The grainy CCTV footage showed Marshall filling his truck and speaking briefly to another man. The man wore a hood, his face obscured, but his body language was aggressive. "Who is that?" Christina demanded, pointing at the screen. The attendant shook his head. "No idea. Never seen him before." Christina left the station with a gnawing sense of unease. That night, she made a bold decision. She would return to the forest where Marshall's truck had been found. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay there, buried in the ashes. With the help of a local guide, Christina ventured into the woods. The burned clearing was eerily quiet, the remnants of the truck now replaced by a patch of disturbed earth. She felt a strange pull toward the spot, as if the forest itself remembered what had happened. As they searched, the guide stumbled upon something half buried in the dirt: a rusted keyring with several keys, one of which bore the logo of a storage facility. "This wasn't here before," Christina said, brushing the dirt away. Her heart raced as she took the keys. If they belonged to Marshall, they could unlock a part of his life she had yet to understand. The storage facility was in Lethbridge, a long drive from Pemberton, but Christina didn't hesitate. Inside the unit, she found a mix of old camping gear, family mementos, and a locked box. With trembling hands, she used one of the keys to open it. Inside were more photographs, some of Marshall, smiling with friends, and others of people she didn't recognize. But there was one photo that made her blood run cold. It was of a group standing in front of a cabin in the woods. In the background, barely visible, was the same burned truck. Christina staggered back, the weight of the discovery hitting her like a tidal wave. Whatever had happened to Marshall and Daniel, it wasn't a coincidence. Christina stared at the photograph in her hands, her mind racing. The image of the cabin with the truck in the background was unmistakable. Her brother's truck, but the photo looked old, its edges worn and faded. She examined the faces of the people in the picture, hoping to find a clue. There were 5 of them, each wearing rugged outdoor gear. 4 faces were unfamiliar, but one caught her attention. The man in the center, tall and imposing, bore a striking resemblance to the hooded figure from the gas station's CCTV footage. Her heart pounded as she flipped the photo over. On the back, written in faint pencil, were the words, Pemberton 2016. Christina rushed to the police station with the photograph, her desperation evident. Constable Avery met her in the lobby, taking the photo into her gloved hands. "This man," Christina said, pointing at the figure in the center, "I think he was the one at the gas station. And this cabin, this is where Marshall's truck was found. What does it mean?" Avery examined the photo closely. "If this is from 2016, it could predate both disappearances. We need to find this cabin." Avery called in reinforcements, and within hours, a search team was assembled to revisit the forest. They now had a purpose: to locate the cabin in the photograph. The forest seemed to close in as the team ventured deeper. Thick branches tangled above, blocking out the sun and casting eerie shadows over the group. Christina accompanied them, despite protests from Avery. After hours of searching, the cabin emerged like a ghost from the trees, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surroundings. It was exactly as depicted in the photograph, though age and neglect had left it sagging and overgrown with moss. The air around the cabin felt oppressive, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Stay close," Avery warned as they approached the front door. Inside, the cabin was eerily empty. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs hung in thick sheets from the rafters. But as they explored further, they found a trapdoor in the floor, hidden beneath a threadbare rug. Avery knelt, shining her flashlight over the wooden hatch. "This isn't just a coincidence." With a nod to her team, she pried the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. The basement smelled of damp earth and decay. Christina hesitated at the top of the stairs, but Avery urged her to stay back as the team descended. The room below was stark and unsettling. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of unidentifiable substances. A rusted workbench stood in the corner, littered with tools that seemed more suited for inflicting harm than crafting. Then they found it. Pinned to one of the walls was a map of the Pemberton area, marked with red X's. Next to the map, tacked up like trophies, were photographs of several people. Among them were Marshall Iwasa and Daniel Rioch. Christina's breath hitched as she stared at her brother's face, captured in a candid moment she didn't recognize. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. The photographs suggested a sinister purpose, as if someone had been documenting these people long before their disappearances. The red X's on the map seemed to correspond to locations in the wilderness, possibly other sites of significance. "Whoever did this," Avery said, her voice trembling, "they've been planning this for years." The forensic team combed the cabin for evidence. In a locked cabinet, they found more photographs, receipts, and a small box containing ID cards. Some belonged to Marshall and Daniel, but others were for people who had never been reported missing. "This is bigger than we thought," Green muttered as he cataloged the IDs. "This isn't just about Marshall and Daniel. This might be a pattern spanning years." As word of the discovery spread, a tip came in from an unexpected source. An elderly man named Elias claimed to have seen strange activity near the cabin years ago. "I used to hunt in those woods," Elias told Avery during his interview. "One time, back in 2016, I saw a group of people heading toward that cabin. They had a fire going, and I heard shouting. Thought it might have been a hunting party, but something about it felt wrong. I never went back." Avery pressed him for more details, but Elias could only provide vague descriptions of the group. One detail stood out: a man with a snake tattoo running up his neck, a detail that matched one of the people in the photograph Christina had found. The investigation took a grim turn when a team searching one of the red X locations found human remains buried shallowly in the forest soil. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Daniel Rioch. The news devastated Erica, who had held on to a fragile hope that her brother might still be alive. For Christina, the discovery only deepened her resolve. If Daniel's here, she said to Avery, then Marshall might be at one of the other X's. We have to keep searching. The discovery of Daniel's body made it clear they were dealing with a calculated predator, someone who had been operating undetected for years. The team faced mounting pressure to uncover more before another life was claimed. As they pored over the map, one X stood out. It was far from the others, nestled deep in the back country. Avery pointed to it. "This is our next target," she said. "If Marshall's out there, we need to find him." The search team prepared for their expedition to the most remote red X on the map. Located deep within the rugged backcountry, the marked site was miles from any trail or road. It was an area few dared to venture, even seasoned hikers. Christina insisted on joining, despite the dangers. Constable Avery reluctantly allowed her, knowing Christina's determination was unwavering. "This isn't just about Marshall anymore," Christina told Avery as they packed gear. "Whoever is behind this, they need to be stopped." The forest closed in around them as the team hiked for hours, each step taking them further from civilization. The landscape grew harsher, steep ridges, thick undergrowth, and the haunting silence of a wilderness untouched by man. As the sun began to set, they reached the marked location. It was a clearing bordered by jagged rock formations, the kind that felt ominously perfect for hiding secrets. The air was colder here, heavier, as if the forest itself knew something was wrong. The team spread out, their flashlights cutting through the encroaching darkness. It didn't take long for one of them to shout, "Over here!" They gathered around a shallow grave, freshly disturbed. With solemn precision, the forensic team began their work. Inside, they found the skeletal remains of another victim. Christina held her breath, praying it wasn't her brother. When the remains were examined, it became clear they belonged to neither Marshall nor Daniel. The victim was a woman, her identity unknown. She had been buried with a backpack containing personal items, a water bottle, a torn map, and a notebook. The notebook was damp and partially illegible, but one phrase stood out, scrawled repeatedly across the pages. "They're watching me." Back at the makeshift camp, Avery pored over the notebook. The entries were fragmented and frantic, detailing a descent into paranoia. The woman wrote about hearing voices in the woods, seeing shadows that moved when no one was there, and feeling as though she was being hunted. "This fits the pattern," Green said grimly. "Whoever buried her here was stalking her, just like the others." Christina clutched the photo of the cabin, her hands trembling. How many people has this monster taken? How far does this go? As the night wore on, the team's radios began picking up strange interference, a crackling static punctuated by faint, unintelligible whispers. At first, they dismissed it as a technical glitch, but as the hours passed, the disturbances grew louder. "It's just the mountains," one officer said, his voice betraying his unease. "Signal interference, nothing to worry about." But Christina wasn't convinced. "It's like they don't want us here," she murmured, staring into the forest's shadowy depths. The unease deepened when one of the officers reported finding a trail of broken branches and scuffed earth leading away from the clearing. The path was fresh, as if someone or something had been watching them and fled. Avery made the call. "We follow it. Whatever's out here, we can't let it get away." The team moved cautiously along the trail, their flashlights illuminating the uneven ground. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual rustle of nocturnal animals conspicuously absent. Hours passed before they reached another clearing. In its center stood a crude campsite. A fire pit filled with cold ashes, a tarp strung between trees, and a scattering of personal effects. The campsite looked recently abandoned. Among the items was a pile of torn photographs, all of them missing faces, scratched out with something sharp. At the edge of the campsite, they found a makeshift altar, a slab of rock smeared with what appeared to be blood, surrounded by crude carvings etched into the stone. "What the hell is this?" Green muttered, stepping back. Avery's flashlight lingered on the carvings, her expression grim. "It's not just stalking. This might be something ritualistic." As they combed through the campsite, Christina found a torn piece of paper tucked into the folds of the tarp. It was a page from a calendar, dated 2 years earlier. Scrawled on the back were coordinates and a single name: Daniel. Christina's heart sank. This must be where he was taken. The coordinates pointed to another remote location, even deeper into the wilderness. Avery called for backup, but communication with the outside world was intermittent at best. "We're on our own for now," she told the group, "but we need to keep moving." As they ventured further, the team began noticing signs that they were being watched. Shadows moved just beyond the reach of their flashlights. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the trees, always too far to pinpoint but close enough to unsettle. Christina clutched her flashlight tighter, her mind racing with thoughts of Marshall. Was he still alive? Was he enduring the same terror they felt now? When they finally reached the coordinates, they found another grim scene. A rusted trapdoor was hidden beneath a pile of leaves and branches, leading into what appeared to be a bunker. "This is it," Avery said, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. The team prepared to descend, not knowing what awaited them below. Christina stood at the edge of the opening, staring into the darkness. "Marshall," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm coming for you." The bunker was cold and oppressive, its damp air carrying a metallic tang. The narrow staircase descended into near darkness, the beam of their flashlights barely piercing the void. Avery led the team, her hand steady on her sidearm, while Christina stayed close behind, her resolve outweighing her fear. The walls were concrete, covered in faded graffiti and strange symbols scratched into the surface. A musty smell hung in the air, mingling with something more acrid, something that sent a shiver down Christina's spine. "This place looks abandoned," Green muttered, his voice low. "But someone's been here recently." At the base of the stairs, the team found a series of small claustrophobic rooms. Each was sparsely furnished with crude beds, rusted chairs, and battered storage lockers. One room contained a makeshift workbench, littered with tools, ropes, and other items that hinted at sinister purposes. Pinned to the walls were more photographs, some blurred or torn, but others shockingly clear. Marshall's face appeared in several of them, his expression strained, as though taken under duress. There were also photos of Daniel, along with others the team couldn't identify. Christina felt her knees weaken as she stared at her brother's image. "He was here," she whispered. "This is where they brought him." Avery pointed to a door at the far end of the hallway. "Let's keep moving." The final room was unlike the others. It was larger, its walls adorned with symbols similar to those found on the altar at the campsite. In the center of the room was a circular platform, surrounded by candles burned down to their bases. The faint outline of a symbol had been scrawled on the floor, its meaning unclear but undoubtedly sinister. "What is this place?" Green asked, his voice shaking as he stepped cautiously into the room. Avery examined the markings with a grim expression. "It's some kind of ritual site, but who built it, and why?" Christina's eyes were drawn to a corner of the room where a pile of items lay discarded. She rushed over and sifted through the debris, her breath catching when she found a tattered flannel shirt, Marshall's. This was his, she said, clutching the shirt to her chest. As the team searched the room, a sudden noise echoed through the bunker, a metallic clank, like a heavy door slamming shut. Avery spun around, her flashlight sweeping across the hallway behind them. "We're not alone," she said, motioning for everyone to stay close. Footsteps echoed from above, deliberate and heavy. Whoever was in the bunker wasn't trying to hide. Avery signaled for the team to form a defensive line, their flashlights trained on the stairwell. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity, but no one appeared. Instead, the footsteps faded, replaced by an eerie silence. In the oppressive stillness, Christina noticed something she hadn't seen before. A journal lying near the platform. Its leather cover was worn, and its pages were brittle with age. She flipped it open, scanning the handwritten entries. The journal belonged to someone named Elias, a name that matched the elderly man who had given them the tip about the cabin. The entries described a secret group operating in the wilderness, targeting individuals for reasons that were never fully explained. They called it the Offering. Christina read aloud, her voice trembling. It was a ritual to appease something they believed lived in the forest. A chill ran through the group as the implications sank in. This wasn't just the work of a predator, it was something far darker, rooted in twisted beliefs. The team decided to leave, their nerves fraying as the oppressive atmosphere of the bunker closed in around them. But as they made their way back to the surface, they found the trapdoor they'd entered through had been sealed shut. "Someone's locked us in," Green said, his voice tinged with panic. Avery examined the door, her jaw tightening. "We'll find another way out." The team doubled back, searching the bunker for alternate exits. The faint sound of footsteps returned, this time echoing from every direction. It was impossible to tell where they were coming from. And then the lights went out. Plunged into complete darkness, the team scrambled to regroup. Avery barked orders, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Flashlights on! Stay together!" But the footsteps grew louder, faster, as if circling them. Christina clutched Marshall's shirt, her breath coming in short gasps. In the chaos, one of the team members, Officer Carter, found a hidden panel in one of the walls. Behind it was a narrow passageway, leading upward. "Here!" he shouted, motioning for the others to follow. The group hurried into the passage, the sound of footsteps still hauntingly close. The narrow space forced them to move single file, each step a grueling test of endurance. When they finally emerged, they found themselves in a different part of the forest, far from their original entry point. The bunker's secrets were buried once again beneath layers of earth and shadows. As they caught their breath, Christina noticed something carved into a nearby tree, a symbol matching the ones they'd seen in the bunker and at the campsite. Below it were the words, "Leave this place." Avery turned to the group. "We're not done here, but we need reinforcements. This isn't just a case of missing persons, it's something far worse." Christina looked back toward the forest, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on her. Marshall was still out there, somewhere, and whatever was behind this, it wasn't going to stop. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "Not without him." The group emerged from the forest, shaken but resolute. Reinforcements arrived at dawn, a larger team armed with fresh supplies and the latest information from the bunker. Christina remained at the center of it all, her resolve unwavering despite the fear clawing at her heart. "This isn't over," she said to Avery. "We have to go back. We're close. I can feel it." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but Avery nodded. "We'll move out again once we've regrouped. If we're going to confront this, we need to be prepared." By midday, the team retraced their steps into the wilderness, now bolstered by additional officers and tracking dogs. They followed the symbols carved into trees, which seemed to form a deliberate path deeper into the forest. As the trail wound further from civilization, Christina couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air grew heavy, and the forest's silence became deafening. "We're being led somewhere," Avery murmured, scanning the terrain with her flashlight. "Whoever's behind this, they want us to find something." Hours later, the team arrived at another clearing, this one larger and more deliberate than the others they had encountered. In its center stood a massive stone altar, weathered by time but unmistakably the focal point of countless rituals. Around it were remnants of burned wood, bones, and tattered clothing. Christina's heart stopped when she saw a small item resting on the altar, a silver locket she had given Marshall years ago. "Marshall was here," she said, her voice breaking. She rushed forward, ignoring Avery's warning to wait. As Christina approached the altar, she noticed something etched into its surface, a spiral of names carved meticulously into the stone. Both Marshall and Daniel's names were there, alongside dozens of others. "This is a record," Avery said grimly, "of their victims." Before the team could process the discovery, a sound echoed through the forest, an eerie, guttural hum that seemed to come from all directions at once. The dogs barked wildly, straining at their leashes, and the officers raised their weapons. Then, out of the shadows, figures emerged. There were 3 of them, clad in dark, weathered clothing that blended with the forest. Their faces were obscured by masks carved from wood, each bearing the same spiral symbol found on the altar. They moved with unsettling calm, stopping just beyond the reach of the flashlights. "Hands up!" Avery shouted, her voice commanding. The figures didn't move. One of them, the tallest, tilted their head as if observing the group with curiosity. Then, with a low, raspy voice, they spoke. "You don't belong here." The air grew colder as the tension mounted. Christina stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Where's my brother? Where's Marshall?" The tallest figure turned to her, their wooden mask betraying no emotion. "He is where he chose to be," they said cryptically. Christina's anger flared. "You're lying. He didn't choose this. What did you do to him?" The figure raised a hand, gesturing to the altar. "He's part of the forest now, as are the others. This place takes what it's owed." Before the group could respond, the figures disappeared into the trees as silently as they had come. Avery gave the order to search the area, but it was as if the forest had swallowed the intruders whole. Christina refused to give up. With the help of a tracking dog, she followed a faint trail leading away from the altar. The path wound through dense underbrush until it opened into a smaller, hidden clearing. There, slumped against a tree, was Marshall. Christina ran to her brother, her heart pounding. He was alive but barely conscious, his face gaunt and his clothes tattered. "Marshall!" she cried, shaking him gently. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he seemed to recognize her. You found me," he whispered, his voice weak. The team quickly moved to stabilize Marshall, carrying him back toward the main clearing. As they retreated, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest seemed to lift, as if the woods themselves were releasing their hold. Back at the station, Marshall was treated for dehydration and exposure. Though his physical wounds would heal, the psychological scars were deeper. He spoke little of what had happened, only mentioning vague memories of being taken to the bunker and later left in the clearing. The figures in the masks were never found, and their motives remained a haunting mystery. The evidence from the bunker and the ritual sites pointed to a network of people operating in the shadows, but no definitive answers emerged. Christina stayed by Marshall's side, vowing to help him rebuild his life. Though the case was officially closed, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest still held secrets that might never be uncovered. Months later, as winter gave way to spring, Christina returned to the forest one last time. She stood at the edge of the clearing where Marshall had been found, staring at the altar. The spiral of names still haunted her, a grim testament to those who hadn't been saved. As she turned to leave, a faint sound reached her ears, a whisper carried by the wind. It sounded like her brother's voice, calling her name. Christina froze, her breath catching. But when she turned back, the forest was silent once more.